The wedding hall shimmered under the golden glow of chandeliers, casting a soft, warm light over the joyous celebration. The air buzzed with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the faint melody of a live band playing in the background. Guests in elegant attire moved gracefully around the room, exchanging smiles and stories, their faces reflecting the happiness of the occasion. At the center of it all stood Emma, the bride, radiant in her flowing white gown. Her eyes sparkled as she looked at her groom, Jake, who stood tall and proud beside her. Their love was evident in every glance, every shared smile. Tonight was their night, a day they had dreamed of for so long. Among the many guests standing quietly near the back was Alex. He wasn't dressed in a tuxedo like the others. Instead, he wore his military uniform, a symbol of dedication, sacrifice, and honor. His presence was noticeable yet understated. He wasn't one for the spotlight, and he seemed perfectly content watching from a distance. Some guests approached him with warm handshakes and kind words, showing appreciation for his service. Others, however, merely glanced his way before continuing their conversations, seemingly indifferent. It wasn't hostility, just a quiet, unspoken separation between the world of celebration and the world Alex had come from. For now, everything seemed perfect, but the night was far from over, and before it ended, the true meaning of respect, sacrifice, and friendship would be tested in ways no one expected. As the evening progressed, the chatter in the room grew louder, and everyone seemed lost in their own conversations. It was then that Ryan, a distant relative of the bride, spotted Alex standing in the corner. His eyes narrowed slightly, taking in the military uniform. There was something about it, maybe the pride, maybe the quiet dignity, that irritated Ryan. He sauntered over, a smug smile on his face, as if he'd found his target for the night. Ryan, always the one to seek attention with his biting sense of humor, couldn't resist. "So the soldier's here," he remarked loud enough for those nearby to hear, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's the matter? Just here to follow orders, huh? You know, like a good little robot." Alex, feeling the sting of the words, kept his eyes focused on the floor, his posture stiffening just a little. He didn't want to engage. He'd learned over the years that sometimes silence was the best response, but Ryan wasn't finished. "Oh, and don't you love it? All those years spent in the army, wasting your life away, doing what, playing hero?" Ryan chuckled, his voice getting louder, ensuring the guests heard. "What's the point? Nothing but blindly following orders, right? I bet you don't even know why you're doing half of it." A few guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Some lowered their heads, not sure how to react. Others, particularly those close to Ryan, chuckled nervously, as if they didn't want to upset the awkward balance of the evening. Emma, standing across the room, caught the tail end of the remarks, her brow furrowed, and her stomach twisted. She could tell something wasn't right, but with so many eyes on them, and the wedding at its peak, she didn't know how to step in without drawing attention or ruining the moment. Her heart pounded. She could feel the tension building, but she wasn't sure how to diffuse it without causing more harm. Jake had been enjoying the night, his heart swelling with joy as he watched Emma laugh with their friends and family. But when he overheard Ryan's mocking voice cutting through the air, something inside him shifted. The humor, the light-heartedness, it all seemed to vanish in an instant. He glanced over at Alex, who remained silent, his face unreadable, but his discomfort evident. Jake felt a rush of protectiveness surge through him. Without a second thought, he made his way through the crowd, his expression calm, but his steps deliberate. He reached the small group where Ryan was still mocking Alex, his voice a little louder now. Jake cleared his throat, his voice firm as he addressed Ryan. "That's enough." Ryan turned to face Jake with an arrogant smirk, clearly unbothered. "What's the matter, Jake? Don't tell me you're going to defend your buddy here, the soldier who follows orders like a dog." Jake's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained controlled. "I said, that's enough. You don't know what you're talking about." For a moment, Ryan laughed it off, thinking Jake was just being overly sensitive. But Jake wasn't done. The crowd had begun to quiet, sensing that something serious was about to unfold. "I'm not going to sit here and let you talk about Alex like that," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with weight. "You want to know why?" He paused, making sure everyone was listening. "Because Alex saved my life. He brought me back from the dead." A shocked silence fell over the room, and Ryan's smirk faltered. The weight of Jake's words hung in the air like a thick fog, and the guests exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. Jake's voice softened as he continued, his eyes shifting slightly as the memories came rushing back. We were in enemy territory, pinned down under heavy fire. I was injured, unable to move, and we were surrounded. There was no way out, no chance for anyone to make it out alive. Jake's throat tightened, except Alex. He didn't hesitate. He risked everything, putting himself in harm's way to get me to safety. Without him, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be marrying Emma tonight. The room was still, no one dared to speak. Ryan, who had been so eager to mock Alex just moments ago, stood frozen, his cocky attitude slipping away. His face had drained of color, his eyes widening in shock. Jake stepped closer to Ryan, his voice now laced with emotion. You have no idea what it's like to face death, to have someone risk everything for you. So don't you dare disrespect Alex, not here. Not ever. Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He stuttered for a moment, realizing the gravity of the situation, and for the first time, his confidence faltered. The crowd, once tense, now held their breath, waiting for him to react, but no one could have predicted what would happen next. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His emotions were rising, but he knew this was the moment to speak the truth. The words weren't just for Ryan, they were for everyone in the room, especially for Alex. His voice, though steady at first, began to shake with the weight of the memories. Without Alex, Jake continued, his eyes never leaving the soldier, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be standing beside the love of my life, ready to marry her. I wouldn't have made it out of that mission alive. None of us would have. The room went completely silent, as though everyone held their breath. Emma, standing beside Jake, felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't known the full extent of what Jake had gone through until now. The man she loved, the man she was about to marry, had nearly lost everything, but it was Alex who had pulled him back from the edge. Jake's hands clenched at his sides as he continued, his voice thick with emotion. That mission, it wasn't just me. Alex wasn't the only one at risk. And swore. It wasn't the only one at risk. He lost teammates. Men he cared about. Men who fought alongside him, and died in that hellhole. But Alex didn't leave. He stayed. He risked everything, not only to get me out, but to make sure that I wasn't the only one who made it out. Emma's chest tightened as she watched Jake's face, the raw emotion written all over him. She had heard bits and pieces of his time in the military, but hearing it like this, hearing it from Jake's own lips, made the reality hit her like a punch to the gut. The sacrifice, the bravery, it was all so much more than she had ever imagined. She turned her gaze to Alex. He stood there still as ever, his face composed, but the flicker of pain in his eyes was unmistakable. Without thinking, Emma walked over to him, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The room parted as she made her way to the man who had saved her fiancé's life. She stopped in front of him, her eyes filled with tears. Alex, she said quietly, her voice breaking. I don't know how to thank you, for everything, for saving him, for bringing him home to me. Alex looked at her, surprised by the sudden attention, but he said nothing. He wasn't the kind of man who sought praise. Instead, he simply nodded, his lips forming a small, humble smile. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but Emma's gratitude was enough. The weight of the story hung in the air, and everyone in the room seemed to take a collective breath. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had started as a light-hearted celebration had turned into something far more meaningful. The truth about the sacrifice, the risks, and the bond between the two men had left an indelible mark on everyone who heard it. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, looking from Jake to Alex, his face flushed with shame. He had no words to defend himself, no witty retort to offer. His earlier bravado had completely evaporated, and all he could do was stand there flustered, trying to muster anything, to make the situation better. But no matter how hard he tried, his words wouldn't come. They were lost, replaced by the realization that he had been wrong, so terribly wrong, about the very man standing in front of him. The room remained heavy with the emotional weight of Jake's revelation, and for a moment, it seemed as though nothing more could be said. But just as the silence began to settle, an older man, who had been quietly observing the scene from a distance, stepped forward. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his silver hair neatly combed, and his eyes reflected a deep wisdom and experience. He cleared his throat, gaining the attention of the guests. His voice, though calm, carried a sense of authority that commanded the room's focus. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he began, his eyes locking onto Ryan, "but I can't let this go." Ryan's eyes flickered toward him, his discomfort growing by the second. He had no idea who this man was, but something about the way he spoke made him feel uneasy. The older man took a few steps closer, his voice steady. "My name is Colonel John Roberts, retired. I spent years serving in the military, and I've seen more than my fair share of sacrifice. I know what it's like to risk everything for others, but I also know when ignorance and disrespect need to be called out." Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but the colonel raised his hand, silencing him. "You see, Ryan," the colonel continued, "I've been watching this unfold and I've heard enough. You don't understand what it means to honor those who've served, but I'll tell you this, your grandfather did. Your grandfather was a war hero. He fought for this country, and he earned a great deal of respect for it." Ryan's face drained of color, his mouth went dry, and he could barely process the words the colonel had just spoken. "My grandfather," he stammered, his voice shaky. "You must be mistaken." "I didn't," the colonel nodded solemnly. "I knew your grandfather well. He was a decorated officer in World War II, saved countless lives, and led many brave men through unimaginable circumstances. He was a man of honor, and every soldier who fought with him knew it. But I suppose you never cared to ask about him, did you?" Ryan's heart began to race. He had never known much about his grandfather's military service. His family had kept the stories quiet, buried beneath the years. But now, hearing the colonel's words, the weight of his ignorance crashed down on him. The room was still, people shifted uncomfortably, and several guests exchanged knowing glances, their disappointment evident. Ryan's world suddenly seemed to crumble around him. The mocking words he had thrown at Alex earlier now felt like a cruel joke, an insult not only to a soldier, but to his very own family's legacy. Ryan opened his mouth, his throat tight. "I had no idea," he whispered, his voice barely audible. His face flushed with embarrassment as he turned to face Alex, who was still standing quietly by the sidelines, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Ryan's voice wavered as he forced out the only words that seemed right. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect you, or anyone who served." But the apology felt weak, and the shame that coursed through Ryan made it clear he would never be the same after this moment. Alex stood there, his posture still calm, though the weight of the moment was not lost on him. He had heard the apology, and he could see the genuine remorse in Ryan's eyes. But Alex wasn't the type to make a spectacle of things or hold grudges. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the words. "Apology accepted," Alex said, his voice quiet but firm. "But understand this, respect isn't something you give just when it's convenient. It's something you give every day, whether it's to someone in uniform or anyone else who deserves it." Ryan stood frozen, the truth of Alex's words sinking in deeper than any lecture could. The words he had so carelessly spoken were now a constant echo in his mind, a reminder of the ignorance he had once been blind to. He lowered his head, his shoulders slumping slightly, as he took in the lesson. For a few moments, there was a heavy silence, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind filled with tension. Slowly, as if on cue, the air began to shift. Guests who had been standing on the edges of the conversation began to relax, the tension easing away. People returned to their conversations, their laughter picking up once more as the night regained its warmth and joy. Jake, who had been watching the exchange closely, turned to Alex with a look of deep gratitude. Without a word, he pulled Alex into a hug, a gesture that was simple but spoke volumes about the bond they shared. Alex hesitated for just a second, but then he returned the embrace, his arms wrapping around his best friend. In that moment, they both understood that their friendship was unbreakable, forged in the fire of shared experiences and sacrifices. Emma, who had been standing off to the side, watched the scene unfold with teary eyes. She couldn't express in words how much she appreciated Alex, not just for saving Jake, but for being there for him, for being the kind of person who stood by his friends without hesitation. She walked over to him, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. "Alex," she said, "you've done so much for Jake, for all of us. You're part of our family, and we want you here tonight. Please stay, this is your night too." Alex gave her a small smile, a humble nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you, Emma. I'm honored to be here." And with that, the night continued, the celebration of love and union more meaningful than ever. As the guests laughed and danced, there was a new sense of appreciation in the air, a deeper understanding of what true sacrifice and friendship meant. Alex, once again, blended into the background, content to watch his friends enjoy the night. But inside he felt a warmth, a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a friend, a brother, a part of something much bigger than himself. The wedding, which had started with a hint of discomfort, now felt complete, a celebration not only of love but of the quiet, unspoken sacrifices that often go unnoticed. And as the night went on, the bond between the bride, the groom, and the soldier remained unshakable. As the night continued, the laughter and joy returned to the wedding. The clinking of glasses and the gentle hum of conversation filled the air once more. The earlier tension had faded, replaced by the warmth of the celebration. But for those who had witnessed the exchange, the lesson about respect and sacrifice lingered in the back of their minds. Alex stood quietly by the edge of the dance floor, watching as Jake and Emma shared a dance, their faces alight with happiness. A small, content smile tugged at his lips. He was happy for them, truly, but he remained in the background, always the silent supporter, the quiet hero. A few guests approached him throughout the evening, offering heartfelt thanks for his service. Alex nodded in acknowledgement, his replies humble, never seeking attention. To him it was just another part of life, another responsibility he carried with pride. Ryan, standing at the other end of the room, watched Alex from a distance. His earlier arrogance had faded, replaced with reflection. He seemed lost in thought, a man changed by the weight of the night's events. The camera slowly zoomed out, focusing on Alex as he took a sip of his drink. Surrounded by the lively crowd, he remained an unassuming figure, a quiet hero, whose story wasn't written in the loud moments, but in the quiet acts of sacrifice and love that bound friendships together. Thank you for watching this powerful story about sacrifice, respect, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship. It's a reminder that heroes often go unnoticed, and true strength comes not just from what we do, but how we treat others. If this story touched you, we'd love for you to join our community. Please remember to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts or experiences, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter, stories that remind us of the power of kindness, gratitude, and courage. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us.